Get ready for Tennessee's next game on the hardwood with our Vols matchup breakdown. We preview the Vols opponent and give you Tennessee's keys to victory here on Vol Basketball Fever. Welcome in, Vol fans, to another Vol basketball matchup breakdown video here on Vol Basketball Fever. I am Nathanael Rutherford. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this video. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the YouTube channel while you're here. And please check out our podcast as well. We're available everywhere you get your podcasts, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google, wherever you get them, we're available there. So please check us out. Subscribe today to this channel and to the podcast. Check out the interview I did with new Lady Vol addition Jazz Powell, who transferred from Minnesota. You can find that here on the YouTube channel and on our podcast as well. Well, we're here for another matchup breakdown for Tennessee, the last one of the regular season for the Vols. I will do some for the SEC tournament, not probably one for every game for the SEC tournament for the men's team, but I'll try to do one at least for the first one that Tennessee plays, and then also for the NCAA tournament. So we'll still be doing them for postseason. So this isn't the last one for us, just the last one for the regular season. Tennessee taking on Arkansas at noon Eastern. It's senior night, I guess senior day for Tennessee. It actually will be John Fulkerson's last game in Thompson-Boling Arena this time, as opposed to last year where he thought he was going to play his last game and then came back for another year. This time it will be his last year. I'm sure it'll be a very emotional scene in Knoxville and in Thompson-Boling for Fulkerson, for the fans, and for everyone in attendance there. So emotions are going to be kind of high. I'm going to be interested to see how that kind of affects things for Tennessee and if that factors into either a slow start or a fast start, or if it affects anything at all in this game, especially for Fulkerson in this one. But Tennessee, again, playing Arkansas, these two teams just played fairly recently, like 2.5 weeks ago or so in Fayetteville. A little bit more on that in just a second. But this is going to close out the regular season. You have a lot at stake here. If Tennessee wins this game, and if Auburn loses their game against South Carolina, which isn't super likely, but if that happens, Tennessee can finish, and just like they did in 2018, with a share of the SEC regular season title with Auburn. And technically, Tennessee would own the tiebreaker because they beat Auburn, I guess, but they would be the number one seed in the SEC tournament if they win and if Auburn loses. But I don't know if that's going to happen. Tennessee can go anywhere from potentially the 4 seed if they lose to Arkansas to the 1 seed. So there's a lot at play here. Kentucky's outcome will also affect how things play out for Tennessee in the seeding department. Tennessee could be a 3, a 2, or a 1. Just kind of depends on what happens with this game against Arkansas and what happens against Kentucky and Auburn in their games as well. But focusing on this game specifically, not just for the SEC tiebreakers and all that stuff as well, Arkansas comes into this game red hot. They've won 5 straight games and 14 of their last 15 contests, one of those, of course, including the last time these two teams played. But it's also worth noting that every time this season that the Vols have played an SEC opponent twice and lost the first meeting, they've gone on to win the second. Tennessee lost to LSU on the road on January 8th and then beat them at home on January 22nd. They lost on the road to Kentucky on January 15th, then won at home on February 15th. The Vols lost on the road to Arkansas on February 19th, and we'll see what happens at home on March 5th. So it's funny also that those previous 2 times was also on the road first and then at home. And Tennessee won the home matchup because Tennessee, of course, is undefeated at home this season. Arkansas has only had 1 loss at home this season, but they're a different team on the road. More on that in just a second. This will be a battle of the top 2 defenses in the SEC. The Vols are number 1 in scoring defense and league play, only giving up 66 points per game. And Arkansas second, giving up just 66.5 points per game. So not a whole lot of difference there between the two in terms of points per game given up. And both are in the top 3 in KenPom when it comes to defensive efficiency in SEC play. In fact, as you'll remember from just a couple weeks ago when these two teams squared off, Arkansas has been the best defensive team in SEC play this year, with the number 1 defensive efficiency in league play per KenPom. Tennessee has the 3rd. Them and Auburn are almost tied with that. I think Auburn is like 0.3 differential when it comes to their efficiency rating there. So Auburn and Tennessee are very close, 2 and 3, when it comes to best defenses in the SEC this year in SEC play. Arkansas, however, again, number 1 in defensive efficiency in league play. They also have the 2nd best effective field goal percentage defense in league play, with teams only having a 45.5 or 44.5, percent effective field goal percentage, and the fourth best turnover rate on defense in SEC play at 21.7%. So over 1/5 of their opponents' possessions end in a turnover for Arkansas. They have the top 3-point percentage defense in SEC play as well, as conference teams are only making 28.2% of their threes against the Razorbacks. Despite teams getting off a decent amount of threes against Arkansas, they're not making hardly any of them. So Tennessee, in the last game between these two, the Vols shot a lot of threes but didn't make very many of them. Tennessee, typically a much better three-point shooting team at home. We'll be very interested to see if that's different this time playing in Thompson-Boling as opposed to Bud Walton. In fact, the last time these two teams played, that defense was evident for Arkansas and Tennessee too, as the Vols managed just 48 points and a 58-48 loss at Bud Walton Arena on February 19th. Again, Tennessee held Arkansas to 58 points, but they only scored 48 themselves. Tennessee went a combined 4 of 24 from 3 as a team in that game, and UT's post players pretty much did next to nothing, with Urosh, Brendan Huntley Hatfield, and Fulkerson combining for 5 points and 12 rebounds as a tandem, as a trio. Jonas Adu actually was the most productive, most effective, in my opinion, in that game. He had 4 points and 6 boards on 2 of 3 shooting, but again, still not incredible. Didn't block a shot or anything in that game either. It was still not a great performance overall from Tennessee's post players in that game. As you remember, though, fouls were a huge issue in that game, as Kennedy Chandler, Josiah Jordan-James, and Santiago Vescovi all got in foul trouble pretty quickly. And all 3 of them had 4 fouls at one point late in the game, and Josiah ended up fouling out. I think it was Josiah or Santi ended up fouling out. It's also worth noting those 3 played the most minutes for the Vols per game. So those guys getting into foul trouble really did not let Tennessee get into a rhythm. And I remember Chandler picking up his third right near the end of the first half as well. So that made him sit on the bench early in the second half, and you had Ziegler running point, which is, Ziegler's a good point guard, but he's been better as a complementary role this year. And it's kind of the second point guard on the floor, not as much when he's been the main guy on the floor, when you haven't had Vescovi or you haven't had Chandler out there to help him out. In that game, Vol fans will remember, as I just mentioned, that the fouls were a huge issue. Whether or not all of them were deserved is also another conversation to be had. But Tennessee was called for 24 fouls in that game compared to Arkansas being called for just 16. That is a huge discrepancy. 16 fouls for Arkansas, 24 for Tennessee. Although J.D. Notae for Arkansas did foul out of the contest late, and he's obviously a very effective scorer. But Jalen Williams for Arkansas, who's very much known for drawing charges, finished the game with a double-double with 13 points and 16 rebounds. And who knows how many charges drawn he was also credited with in that game. Arkansas also scored 13 points off turnovers compared to UT's 2 in that game. So that was also a huge difference, was they actually got points off of Tennessee's 15 turnovers, whereas Arkansas only turned the ball over 10 times, and Tennessee only got 2 points off of those. So again, partially a part of that was also because Tennessee's guards were out of the game, and they're the ones that are more consistently able to get those points off turnovers. But when you don't have Josiah or Santi or Kennedy out there for long stretches of time, Tennessee's offense just was not able to do really anything in that game. And again, I'm not trying to blame it on the refs. Tennessee also just was not good on offense, but I think a lot of that was because the fouling and the refereeing in that game took them out of their rhythm. This will only be Arkansas's 9th true road game this year. They've only played in 8 so far, which is the fewest in the SEC. Again, this will be their 9th, which will bring them into a tie with a couple of schools for the least in the SEC. But it's still just kind of odd to me that to see that low of a road game total. For example, for comparison, Tennessee has played in 11 true road games, and most of the SEC teams have played in at least 10 this year. A lot of them have played it in 10 or more. And every other team except for Arkansas, has already played in 9. This will be Arkansas's 9th. They're 5-3 in true road games this year, with losses at Alabama, at Mississippi State, and at Texas A&M. So Bama and Mississippi State are tough places to play. I'm not really sure about A&M. That's a bit of a head scratcher as well. But they also didn't play a true road game until SEC play, period. They had 4 neutral site games, and one of them was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they lost that one to Hofstra. So again, they didn't have a true road game until they got into SEC play. And when they got there, they didn't have to play road games against Kentucky or Auburn, and then they're not playing a road game against Tennessee until the last game of the season. So again, they didn't have to face the other 3 in the top 4 of the SEC didn't face two of them on the road and didn't face Tennessee on the road until right now, the last game of the regular season. So you're probably wondering, based on all of that just how different is Arkansas on the road than they are at home? Because if you remember, I mean, Arkansas just, again, has been very elite at home, just like the rest of the top four teams in the SEC have. They were 17-1. They only had one loss. I think the rest of them were undefeated, but still one loss. It was to Vanderbilt of all teams, which is weird. But how has Arkansas been in those two road games? Well, in those 8 true road games, again, mentioned it, they're 5-3. They're averaging 75.3 points per game while giving up 69 points per game. And it's also worth noting that Tennessee will be the highest rated team Arkansas has faced on the road this season, with LSU, who's currently 17th in KenPom, and Alabama, who's 22nd, are being the other top teams Arkansas has faced. Tennessee's right there in the top 10. So a pretty decent difference there between LSU and Bama and Tennessee when it comes to ranking on KenPom and the net as well. Arkansas beat LSU 65-58 in mid-January and lost 68-67 to Bama in mid-February. So they were 1-1 against those two teams, and now they're facing Tennessee, which has a very, very good home environment, and I expect it to be very loud and very crazy on Saturday as well. So again, they averaged 75.3 points themselves on offense on the road and give up 69 points on defense. At home, they're actually scoring a little less with 63.9 points per game, but their defense has been a lot better at home in SEC play, allowing just 64.2 points per game. So that's almost a 5-point per game difference in what they're allowing on the road and what they're allowing at home. Again, that's against SEC teams because, again, they didn't play any non-SEC teams away from home. So I'm only going to count the SEC home games as well for these stats. The biggest difference for Arkansas on the road versus at home, and this probably won't surprise any of you, is the number of fouls they draw per game. At home this season, the Razorbacks are drawing an average of 22.3 fouls from their opponent against SEC foes. So against SEC play, or in SEC play this year, Arkansas's opponents have averaged 22.3 fouls per game in Bud Walton Arena. But on the road, Arkansas's SEC opponents are being called for just 17.6 fouls per game. That is a huge difference. That is almost 5 fouls per game different that the Arkansas's opponents are being called for away from home than they are when they are at home. So part of the reason why Arkansas has been more susceptible on the road, because they aren't getting that home cooking. That home whistle ain't happening when you're on the road. So they're not getting those types of foul calls as often on the road as they are when at home. They're still getting a lot of fouls called on opponents, just not 20 plus a game like they are at home most of the time either. Arkansas themselves are being whistled for 17.9 fouls a game, so basically 18 fouls a game in SEC play on the road, compared to just 16.6 at home in SEC play. So not as huge a discrepancy from home and road there for them on the fouls they've been called for, but still basically at 18 and 16.5, that's still a foul and a half per game difference, more or less on the road versus at home for Arkansas this season. Not only that, but Arkansas hasn't won in Knoxville in 5 years, with their last win coming on January 3rd, 2017 by a score of 82-78. That was Rick Barnes' second year at UT. That's how long it's been since they last won in Knoxville. Tennessee owns a 3-game winning streak over the Razorbacks in Thompson-Boling Arena right now. So again, Arkansas is not as drastically different, I think, on the road as maybe you remember, I guess, last week when I talked about how different Auburn was on the road versus at home. But it's very, very clear from the fouling perspective that Arkansas is getting a lot more favorable whistle at home than they are away from home. So I'll be very interested to see how many charges Jalen Williams actually is able to pick up in this game, or if he's actually going to get whistled for some fouls, and as he should, for some of those charges he's being gifted by some of these referees. But honestly, guys, that's about it. There hasn't really been a whole lot that's changed between these two teams since the last time I did one of these videos. If you want to get maybe some more minutia, you can go and check out the previous one I did here. I'll put a card in the top right-hand corner here for you guys to check it out. But, I mean, you guys know a lot about this Arkansas team probably at this point. If you remember the last time these two teams played, J.D. Note is capable of exploding for 20, maybe even 30 points. He did that recently. Jalen Williams is able to get double-doubles and be an effective scorer. And again, get a lot of charges as well. And you have the fact that their third leading scorer, their other, the trio of their offensive weaponry in SEC play, especially. That being Stanley Umudi. I forget how you say his name now. I'm so sorry. Both him and Jalen Williams are averaging 13.9 and 13.8 points, which is JT Note averaging 19.7 in SEC play. But you have, again, Williams averaging a double-double. Stanley is a guy who can, one of the few guys on Arkansas's team who can hit threes consistently. He's averaging 40% from three in SEC play. You guys know a lot of this stuff. They're really good defensively. They're not bad offensively. They're not going to, I guess, wow you a ton on offense necessarily, unless JD Note is going off and is having, one of his games. But Jalen Williams is an issue. He's a guy that Tennessee, I'll be interested to see how their posts match up because he dominated Tennessee's post. Again, going back to the stats, Tennessee's trio of the guys I mentioned with Urosh, Fulkerson, and Huntley Hatfield didn't even get those three combined didn't out-rebound Jalen Williams last time that these two teams played it. And if you throw in Jonas Adu's numbers in there, they barely out-rebounded Jalen Williams himself when Tennessee and Arkansas played. So he's going to be an issue. He's going to be a guy that Tennessee has a key in on, along with JD Note. That they can't let Stanley Umudi go out and just jack up a bunch of threes and make a bunch of threes either. So we know that. We know how good Arkansas is defensively. Again, they've been a really good three-point shooting defensive team. I will be very surprised if Tennessee's 4 of 24 from three repeats itself in this game like it did in Bud Walton. But again, Tennessee's shooting a lot better at home this year. The numbers backed it up as well. I'm excited to see this game. I think it's going to be very close. I think it'll be a game that has some ebbs and flows in it. Again, I think it'll be one where, like you saw last time, it was lower scoring, but there were still some runs in there where Tennessee had a lead, I think, at one point in the first half, and then Arkansas pretty much held the lead the rest of the game after taking it before halftime. I expect this one to be emotional because of Senior Day, because of Tennessee being their last big home game of the year, of it being just a game that can decide a lot for SEC tournament seeding. Tennessee, a lot of times, hasn't shown up great in these big games. This year, though, it's been a little different. They showed up great in the home game against Kentucky. They showed up great in the home game against Auburn. I think they'll show up great again in this home game against Arkansas. And again, with the Zakai Ziegler stuff, too, with all the Vol Nation backing him up and, donating over $350,000 to the GoFundMe for him and his mom after they had the house fire and stuff. I'll be interested to see if he comes out just on fire and ready and getting, ready just to beat somebody up, basically. But I bet when he comes into the game, he gets a massive standing ovation when he comes off the bench. Him and Fulkerson are usually the two first guys off the bench. I imagine when both of them, they come in at the same time, you're going to have to, the fans are just going to sit there and they're staying there and clap for an hour, I feel like, just to applaud those two guys coming on the court, the oldest Tennessee Volunteer and one of the youngest Tennessee Volunteers on the team. But that'll be it. Again, I think it'll be close. I don't know what the over-under is or whatever. I'm not a big betting person, but I saw that Ken Palm had Tennessee favored by, I think, like 5 or 6 points, which kind of surprised me because I think it'll be closer than that. But again, Arkansas has been pretty different on the road, and if Tennessee is not being called for a bunch of fouls in this game like they were in Fayetteville, then I feel like I like Tennessee's chances pretty well in this game. It'll be close, I bet, though. So thank you all so much. Give your comments down below and how you feel about this game, what you think about it. Do you think Tennessee will win this one? Do you think it'll be really close? Do you think it's a blowout? Your message you want to send maybe to Ziegler or John Fulkerson here in the comments as well. Please leave them down there and subscribe to the channel while you're here. Like this video, share it. Get ready for Arkansas and Tennessee on Saturday at noon o'clock at Thompson-Boling Arena here in Knoxville. Again, I'm Nathanael Rutherford, and this has been another Vol basketball matchup breakdown on Vol Basketball Fever.